Well, this workshop arose from my attending another workshop, a coaching program I'm in, and telling the other participants, well, I really like my job because I've got great clients, great people to work with, and I really feel like I'm working on important issues for them. And they said, great, well, what else could you do to work on important issues for your clients? And I said, well, you know, one thing that's really been bugging me the last couple of years is I had 2 ranching clients who were wealthy, were doing just great into their later years, but then had a health event, ended up in the hospital, and bang, they ended up in a nursing home. One of them ended up in the Benefice nursing home. The other one ended up in, as Becky calls it, Missouri River Manor. And both of them hated it. They were still very sharp, but their experience was just really bad. One of them, the one that was in Missouri River Manor, could not stand the noise. When I went to visit him, I noticed it was banging around, and he said, this is 24 hours a day. I just hate this. Can't I get out of here? The other one up at Benefice was a little bit older. He was hard of hearing. That was not an issue for him, the noise level. But he hated it. I'm the big medical expert. I'm going to say both of them medically did not have to be in that nursing home. They could have gone home and care could have been arranged for them. They could have been whatever done to that house to make it work. They could have died at home like they wanted to. Didn't happen. The families hadn't planned for it. The medical people are saying, oh, Dad's best off in the nursing home. That's where we can give him the best care, so on and so forth. So there was nothing, and particularly the one up in Benefice was begging me to get him out of there. Well, I didn't have the power to do that. And those 2 experiences have just been bothering me ever since. So when at this workshop about, whatever it was, 6-7 months ago, I realized, you know, if I'm going to be continuing this quest to try to help our great clients, I ought to come up with some tools to deal with this. So I've been doing some research, I've been talking to a lot of people, and I've started to learn a little bit about this. I don't have all the answers yet, but I've got a lot more good questions. And this workshop today is a chance for us to maybe have a dialogue about some of these issues. Because I've found that a lot of us have thought a little bit about here, a little bit there, but we've never really approached it in any kind of a systematic way, and we've usually not talked to our family about this stuff. So just like when we do the estate planning, it's really important to have a living will, but way more important to talk to our wife about what we want to have happen if the living will ever comes into possible effect. I think this whole issue of where we're going to live as we get older, what we'd want to have happen if we ever get to that stage where we're at the end of life and it's going to question of where we're going to live out our last month or two. I think clarifying our own thoughts and then communicating that is going to be really important. So that's how we got here today. As I got ready for this presentation and talked to people, I realized I'm really talking about 2 separate but related topics. The first one is what I'm calling dying at home. It's for the person who, just like my ranchers, end up in a nursing home. They've been home up till then. They want to go back and spend their last weeks or months at home, and the planning, the issues we're talking about would relate to what we could do to make that happen. The other topic is known in the field as aging in place. That's for those of us who hopefully have maybe tens of years before we ever would get to the end of life. But we're starting to realize our knees are going. We've dealt with our parents and we've seen issues they have on trying to stay home. We've dealt with the issue of whether someone is going to move to an assisted living facility. And we're starting to think, this could be me. Would I want to do anything about this? What are my thoughts about that? So that's what Becky and I want to talk about today. Aging in place, for those of us now who don't have an extreme medical problem, and dying at home. What we might do ahead of time so that if we get to that point, we and our family have that option. So I want to start off with aging in place. And the starting point, I think, certainly for me and most of us is, someone asks us, we say, we want to stay in our family home. Yeah, they've got a great new facility up there at Grandview, and they've got all these other facilities. Great, I want to stay home. And when we talk about that and we think about it, we may end up in that same place mentally. Or we may say, well, I do want to stay home unless it gets to the point when I can't get out. I don't have anybody to ferry me back and forth or whatever. My medical situation is too serious. Aging in place, the way I'm thinking about it, is saying, right today, I'm good at home. 10 years from now, 5 years from now, my health might be just as good, might not be. Do I want to do anything now with regard to my housing to maximize the chance I can stay home in 10 years if that's what I want to do? Becky and I have gone through this whole analysis with regard to a house we were looking at buying. Ended up not buying it, but Becky did her magic with all the drawings and looking around and so on to figure out whether this was a house where we could age in place. And I think she'll probably talk about it, but it was one level, check. It had pretty good entrance. It wasn't a total level entrance into the house, but it was one step up, so it seemed like you could ramp up to that, so on and so forth. I hope we have many years till we need to worry about that, but our thought was, the next house we want to buy ought to be something that if we want to stay there is going to work for us. So the work we were looking at having done widening doorways and so on, was to allow us to age in place. We also looked at a condo and actually put an offer in on a condo. The killing point there for me was you can't have a dog in a condo, and I haven't given up on having a bird dog.
Yay.
Other options, of course, assisted living, CCR, continuing living, where you move in at one level when you're still capable, and there's other places on the facility where you can move as your health care goes down. Assisted living facilities, the ultimate care being in a nursing home or a skilled nursing facility. We did part of my due diligence was to talk to some people that were knowledgeable about this, including 3 or 4 of my physician friends who deal with internal medicine and older clients. Also, John and I have spent quite a bit of time up at Spectrum Medical, which is the offshoot of the hospital that deals with a lot of these issues. Those people have been just great, and they've been able to share some information from me, which I'll share with you. I had a tour of Grandview about 4 or 5 weeks ago with their new director, David Krebs. Great. I'd been there before, but I hadn't really had the great tour. He said, we probably have the most expensive skilled nursing facility in Great Falls. It's $9,000 a month. Okay, $9,000 a month. So we have other alternatives, and part of this aging in place, to me, is to realize, yes, I love my home, but my home may not be the best place for me when I get down the road. As recently as yesterday, Becky and I were talking to a nurse who said, in effect, when people are at home and are isolated, they go down. And the nurse said, I've seen people then go into a facility, and just the social interaction, they just come way back. In other words, from a health standpoint, psychological standpoint, the fact they're in a facility really is an advantage to them. So it's not just necessarily that clear whether you want to stay at that point that your health has gone down and you're isolated and you can't get out in your home. Well, if you do decide, like Becky and I, that our home, we want to be considering what we can do to it, whether it's a place that even makes sense for us, whether we should be looking at someplace else, what are the physical aspects of the house that would allow you to age in place? Well, first of all, I guess you need to be in good enough health to make it work. If you've got family nearby to help you, that's going to help a lot. The floor plan, I'll let Becky talk about that. Are you still able to drive or not? Again, do you have that transportation? So on. Becky, I think at this point I'm just going to let you talk about some of the remodeling issues and so on. And then once you've done that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the issues on aging in place, and then I want to transition into the other part of the topics. So let's see if we can do this here. Can you attach that and hold this? Okay. And I didn't do a very good job introducing you, so you might give them a little your background and your professional background.
Okay. Hi, everyone. In almost 30 years of marriage, this is the first time Keith and I have found law and interior design have an intersection, other than battling on home remodels and that kind of things, so, our housing. But I am not an expert in aging in place. However, over the years that I've had my interior design practice focusing on residential remodels and doing a lot of different kinds of jobs, as I got introduced to aging in place, I realized that fundamentally it uses what are called universal design principles. And there's been a growing awareness about accessibility, including national legislation in the 1990s, the American Disabilities Act, and we've all seen how that's impacted commercial, higher toilets, open sinks so wheelchairs can get up wider doorways, all of these kinds of things. But it's a more recent thing that people are starting to introduce universal design principles into residential considerations. And with aging in place, your home's floor plan is a fundamental part of your ability to age in place. Okay. Is that okay? And there are a lot of considerations like whether you have a steep driveway, whether you have a lot of steps to get in, whether you have multi-level living, you have your master bedroom, suite, and bathroom upstairs, how wide your doorways are. For accessibility, they need to be 36 inches. Whether your corridors are a minimum of 42 inches. There are all these considerations, and many homes can be adapted to accommodate universal principles. Of the clients I've had in this area, one of the more memorable ones was I had done quite a bit of work for a woman, a couple different houses for her, and she called me and said, I know this isn't your area, but I have a favor to ask. My parents are living in their home, the home that we all grew up in. She was one of a large family, and we were wondering what to give Mom and Dad for Christmas, and we decided that we would like to give your services, but we want you to talk with them, meet with them, and persuade them it's time for them to move into assisted living, that they need to move out of the family home. So I met with them, and it was really heartbreaking and poignant for me because they absolutely did not want to move out of their house. They were just totally clear on that. And they took me on a tour and showed me all the bookcases with all the books alphabetized and all fondly read, and the family pictures in the dining room where they'd had all the family dinners over the years, and where the Christmas tree went, and the different bedrooms of the children, and all of this. And they just didn't want to move. And so I ended up working not for the kids, but really for the parents, and figuring out what they needed to stay in the house. And it was a big house. It had a large stairway, and so what they wanted was a little unusual. They wanted 2 master bedroom suites, both large, with exercise and study areas, and then a large master bath, kind of side by side. So we figured a plan for that. But then the big issue was that was upstairs, and the main living space was downstairs. So we worked with Clark's, and they were able to get a lift between the floors that wouldn't impinge on the person that wasn't using the chair, to change levels. And so they were able to stay in their home, and it's worked out really well for them. But one thing the man said, he said, they were in their, like 76 and 78, later 70s. He said, we missed our window. He said, my dad in his early 60s saw what was coming down the pike and built a 1-level house that he could get old in and die in, which he did. And we have stayed in our house, and now we don't want to. We know we probably should consider moving, but we don't want to. And I think that the important point of that is that there's a window for everything in life. And a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about today, and especially in terms of your house basic floor plan, that is something you really want to think about early in life, not when you really need it. And when people end up needing it, it's not necessarily when made a lot safer, as can the bathroom and other parts of the house, with grab bars. And the problem with grab bars is people just think, you just you screw them in the wall. But a grab bar needs to hold a minimum of 300 pounds of weight, of pressure, because you think of people not only their full weight, but they're like pulling on it. So you need to brace behind, between the 2x4s or whatever your stud system is. And then even if you're not going to use grab bars right away, that's a really great thing to do, is just put the bracing in for grab bars for toilets and showers, tubs, even where there's transitions, like my mother's 86 and we have a cabin at Swan Lake. We put grab bars on the outside steps so that there are only 2 steps coming in, so she can pull herself up, and they work great.
What a bathroom, or our bathroom now and the one we're doing, obviously we're going to do tile, what, I guess, non-slip, any tile, or most tiles, unless they're really rough, can be slick, or what?
Right. So you want to get...
Becky, would you repeat the question so I can pick it up on the camera?
Okay. So he's just wondering what kind of tile, because most tile, unless it's really rough, is slippery. So there are ones that have more abrasion than others, that are actually flooring slip resistant, and you want to look for those. And typically they'll have different types of tile that all match. They'll have a slip resistant flooring, they'll have wall, and they'll look very similar, just subtly. If you feel them, you can tell there's a difference. That's a really important thing in the bathroom. Also, ideally in your shower, you have a way to sit down. Now you can get little water stools, but it's great if you can build in kind of a bench into your shower area, so you can have the option of sitting in the shower. Throughout the house, the difference, now here we have levers, handles on the doors, way better than knobs. Same thing on all your faucets, to have levers instead of knobs. And when you're getting, I had a real arthritic client, she was high functioning other than that, and I spent a lot of time working with her on what worked best for her hands, for cabinet pulls, for her kitchen, well, for her whole house. And universally, a D handle, where you can kind of get under it, not a knob, is a better choice for cabinet hardware. So all of these kinds of considerations add up to making your house work better as you go through the various transitions. Let's see.
What would you recommend, Becky, for the average hallway and door width? Is there sort of a minimum?
There
that
is.
You think is helpful?
Yeah,
Can you state the question again?
so we're being asked what the minimum hallway and doorway width. The minimum hallway width is 42. That's minimum. 48's really ideal. The recommended doorway width is 36 inches. And that will allow for just a normal, not a streamlined wheelchair.
In our master bathroom, we're going to have a pocket door to the toilet. Will a 30-inch pocket door accommodate a wheelchair?
No,
What, do you need a
36.
You have, even though it's right, okay.
Yeah. And since you're not closing it very, typically, most people don't, it's in a master bedroom, don't use them that often. Doesn't make that much difference if the wall will accommodate it, which it should.
It will.
So any other questions about adapting your home? It's amazing.
Well, so let me ask you sort of where you try to get to some break even of thinking all of the adjustments you'd have to make, and sometimes fairly major.
Right.
Reconstructing doorways in small spaces, for example, or redoing total bathrooms. What's your benchmark for the economics of that, and is there a resale market once you've done that?
So again, when you repeat the question.
Okay, so we're, the question is whether, kind of what some of the, I assume like the timelines and in terms of the investment to adapt or modify a house for accessibilities in terms of resale and also just in terms of how long you're going to be in the house. And I in terms of numbers with, and if I may say, you've done your share of remodeling, so you know.
Way much.
Yeah, so you're masterful at that. You can spend so many different, like the number Keith had here for adapting a shower with grab bars and a shower bench and modifying the shower entry is $2,000. Well, I think that's an extremely low figure. If you really have to completely take all your tile off your shower enclosure, get down to the 2x4s, put the bracing in, put in wet wall, put in your tile, reconstruct the whole shower, I think it's probably going to be a little more than that. I think to really do things, if you're at a situation where you're just doing it so you can live in your house, you typically need to think you're going to get at least 10 years out of it. And you can spend, depending on how far you go, all sorts of money. I'm just encouraging people, whatever they're doing, like if you're starting from scratch building, definitely consider all of these factors. Just build them in. You never know what fate your life is going to take. And you will never regret the extra inches you make your doorways or your hallway. For instance, in the house I told you about in the beginning, fortunately they had a 48-inch stairway. So having the lift and having adequate space worked fine. So But how far you want to go with your house if it isn't going to function for that in terms of how much money you're going to get out of it and then whether there's any resale. I think personally that there are a lot of aging people looking for property that want to pay for it being accessible. Yes.
But if I might for a minute, just, and our situation is different in that I just retired 6 months ago and we're building a house now, but I was researching it while I was still working, and I happened to be, found myself in some airport waiting for a plane, and I'm looking at magazines, and it was award-winning home designs, and it said award-winning retirement homes. And as airplanes always are late, I read the whole dang thing and didn't buy it. But anyhow, what we did is it changed. We were going to have a one-story completely, and what it did was we changed our idea. It's gotten away from us a little. It's bigger, but what it said in there that really kind of hit home was, in essence, building, accommodating your caregiver. And what we ended up doing is, okay, we're going to have, and it said the key thing there was the caregiver they would have their own private entrance, and that they could be, in essence, they have access to the house, but both parties can shut each other off, so they aren't doing that type of thing. So what we then did was changed our design, and I've got a 3.5 car garage for my toys and things. So, a lot of homes that are being built today or have been built in the last 10, 15 years have the larger garage, and you've got a great room, people put a great room or a family room above it. And what we're doing in our plans is we have, the steel garage door entrance, that we have one that's very near our front door, and then we're putting in the bonus room, kind of a rafter package for bonus room. And then I had the architect, I told him what we wanted to do is I want the framing plan such that in the event that we need help and have to have somebody come in there, when they're framing that garage roof, great room floor, they're framing it to accept a staircase. And they designed the thing in the garage so that it would, I said, we want to get it kind of at this one end so it doesn't come up in the middle of the room. So it's kind of screws up some of your car parking, but at that point in time, I think that's the last of your concerns. And so when that happens, and what we're going to do, because it's way more space, than we need, and so that room is going to get insulated. We're going to put, floor down, and then right under that, they're going to, when it's framed, it will be such that it will accept a staircase, and then they're going to put the floor down and then spray paint, in essence, cut here. So when that happens, they just go in, cut it, and they've got a staircase laying in the garage that they put together. You lift, get a couple guys there, you lift it up, four lag screws, and you have a staircase to your upstairs. And the other thing is that a wall of that is right, it's the wall for the garage and the house, and that's above which is the mechanical. And we're putting hot and cold water drain. They're going to be shut off shut-offs in the mechanical, but they will be stubbed into that room and a 220, so that in that event, you can put a studio kitchen or
Wow.
make it a studio apartment.
Well, it's really ideal if you can
And-
start from scratch
Right,
and
but I'm just
plan
saying,
ahead.
That's
But-
an idea to look at, because a lot of people, have a family room or something a room above the garage, and that way it's a way to access it.
Or even the one thing I've seen, I've had a couple clients that have not done it for themselves, but they ultimately were doing it for themselves, where they had aging parents and they wanted a place for them, and people are converting garages to a bedroom, bathroom, sitting area for granny or grandpa, and then later on, as they age, then they've got a place for themselves if their bedroom's upstairs. So anyhow, I'll turn this back to Keith. And I hope you've gotten some food for thought about where you live and how you can adapt it.
Dan, I had a meeting here about 2.5 months ago with a guy who is in the commercial real estate business in Ohio, and he's building condo units. And his last project, for every unit, they built space for a caretaker. And they also built non-slippery floors so that people could age in these condos. So people are doing this.
Yeah,
It's
our
smart.
house has no
Yep.
steps.
Yep.
There
Well,
was a long discussion yesterday when they were starting to dig footings for the elevation to get that right.
so just to finish up, at least from my standpoint, on the aging in place issues, Becky's talked all about the physical issues, and she didn't volunteer her services for an inspection, but I'll volunteer her services, part of her work. But not everything involves actually physical needs. It also involves, when you're thinking about aging in place, who's going to help you with the snow shoveling? Who's going to help you with the other outdoor work? And maybe starting to learn about the possibilities so that while you may not need them now, you're kind of ready to step to that level of assistance when you need it. Well, I want to switch gears now, and I want to talk about what I'm calling dying at home. It's the situation where we're thinking now about ending up in a nursing home as we're released from the hospital because we're not ready to go home yet, and knowing that we don't have much time, where are we going to spend our last days? As I've been reading about this, of course, I've been reading about what other lawyers have done. One lawyer told the story of a lady who was a widow, and she said, I just got done taking care of my husband who's died. He's gone now. I don't have any kids, but I want to get my planning set up. I can afford it, so that if I get to the point where I am not able to take care of myself, I'm taken care of in my home. And I don't care whether I'm competent or not. And she had some quote about, I don't care whether it takes 3 people to drag me out of the other room or whatever. I don't care if I'm competent. I want to be able to die in my home. And what the idea was, and I want to get to this later on, was to really clarify ahead of time the circumstances when I do want to die at home, and then to put planning in place to maximize the chance that what I think about will happen. So that's the topic. So we're talking about a house that maybe we've done some retrofitting like Becky's talking about, but when we're coming back from the nursing home, we may not be worrying about the rest of the house. It's how's the bedroom going to work out for me? Does a hospital bed, can I get a hospital bed comfortably? All the equipment I'm going to have needed for me? Is there going to be room for a caretaker, 24/7 care like I'm going to need? So part of it's physical. I went up, as I said, and talked to people at Spectrum Medical, and they said, well, of course, it's hard to generalize, but you might spend $12,000 or $15,000 retrofitting the room where you're going to be when you come back from the nursing home. That's kind of, I mean, I won't say the easy part. It's not so easy, but that's not the big expense in this situation. The big expense here is the care and whether the care is available. So as we're thinking about this, I'm asking them, well, geez, how can we get a handle on this expense? And they said, well, first of all, if you are in a nursing home and you don't think you have too long to live, you might be eligible for hospice services. Hospice services are provided by Medicare. Medicare has no income limit or asset limit like Medicaid, so those of us past 65 are eligible for Medicare, and Medicare will cover people through a hospice program. I knew about that ahead of time. I know lots more about it now because you may have just seen my mom just died, and the last couple of months she was at home in her condo over in the country club area. Hospice people came in and helped my sister. That was huge because my sister lived with my mom since last July. First, it wasn't any big deal. The last 6 months, it was a big deal. And my sister was 24/7 with my mom. It was, I don't know, there's no way I could come close to doing it. And it was just wearing her down. We're starting to look at the alternatives, and luckily we hooked her into hospice services. And that extra level of care that the hospice nurses brought by coming in, and nothing else, spelling Meredith a little bit in terms of the care, made all the difference in the world. So the thought is, very likely if we find ourselves in that situation, hospice will be a source of help. Now, they're not going to help on any retrofitting of the house, but they'll help with medications, they'll help with the skilled nursing care that we very likely need. If we're talking about hospice, generally we're talking about someone who has a life expectancy of less than 6 months. Well, again, that probably fits. So that will help with the expenses. That will help us get the kind of skilled nursing care that's available in the community where we live. The services we're going to need on the most basic level are going to, starting with non-skilled, we'll say home care services. We've got to eat. Somebody has to keep the house going. That kind of thing. We then need someone to provide more of a medical kind of assistance. And we need something possibly 24/7. In talking to the Spectrum Medical people, they said, with one of the guys, Brad Garpstad, who's a head of their program in this area, he said, I've been in this area for 20 years. Only a time or two have I seen a situation where we actually need an RN 24/7. And nursing homes don't have RNs 24/7. You've got an LPN, you've got a licensed practical nurse at night. So don't worry about having to have an RN 24/7. Yes, they're going to need to come in, they're going to have to be involved, but they're not going to be the ones providing the care in the middle of the night. You're going to need an LPN, or maybe a certified nursing assistant to give the help. Then you're going to need the skilled nursing care intermittently during the daytime. What's this going to cost? When I asked the Spectrum Medical people, they said, well, it might cost $25,000 a month. So I dutifully wrote that down. When I talked to my physician friends about that, they said, no. Maybe $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a month on the top end. That's still a lot of money, but it's not $25,000. So I'm thinking right now that if someone decides they want to do some planning ahead of time to allow them to die at home, from the financial standpoint, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to base this probably on 6 months of care. And I'm going to assume I need care, maybe, let's say, $15,000 a month. So 6 times 15, Jerry, help me out on that. What's that? 90,000 bucks. Okay. So it helps us get a little bit of a handle on that. The care, the level of expense, the person who's going to be there 24/7, the cost probably is $18 to $24 an hour. If someone is working on a long-term basis, maybe they'll get a discount. But $18 an hour maybe. The skilled care rate of inflation is, according to one article I read, about 4.2% over the last 5 years. So that's going up pretty fast. The unskilled, the in-home services are pretty level, maybe 1%. A big issue is, okay, we think we can afford this, we feel that we can afford it. Is the care available? If we're right in Great Falls, yes, If we're out somewhere 30 miles east of Big Sandy, probably not. And the recommendation is when you're lining up this care, if it's possible, you want to be lining this up with an agency, not an individual. Because we just don't have the individuals around now, like maybe we had in the past, who are dependable people, who when they say they're going to show up at 10 o'clock tomorrow night, actually are going to show up, and then they'll work their full shift and not go home or whatever. So it's a real issue about whether the services are going to be available farther you get away from town. Spectrum suggested look at a 45-mile radius of Great Falls, for instance. So this area of dying in home is an area of planning I'm thinking about for people who can afford to die at home. It's not for someone who is worried, for instance, about being eligible for Medicaid. It's someone who has a large enough estate that if they want to designate part of this for end-of-life care, there's going to be enough money. And again, going back to this idea that we're planning for 6 months and we're going to get some help from Medicare, we're not talking about $500,000. I just pulled the number out of the air. I said maybe it's $200,000. So as we're thinking about this, we would say, okay, I'm nowhere near there now. How important would it be for me to put some planning in place so that if I'm in that nursing home and I want to go home, I can go home? Under what circumstances would I want that to happen? And then if I do have it happen, what amount of money do I want to set aside for that care? If it's $200,000 and I have a $10 million estate, my humble opinion, I can afford to do that. And if the kids are only going to get $9.8 million, maybe they can get by. That's just my viewpoint. Both of my ranchers, the families were going to do just fine without worrying about dad spending $100,000 or $200,000. Now, people with an estate of $300,000 and $200,000 of it's going to be is designated for in-home care or for end-of-life care. Okay, people want to take care of their kids. I totally get that. But this kind of planning, if we can afford it, is going to involve saying, I want to designate $200,000 for care if I need it. And of course, whatever I don't use, I want it to be for my kids. I want it to be for my charities or whatever. But I am going to put some, first of all, I'm going to clarify my thinking. Under what would I want to have happen? Under what circumstances do I see myself wanting this care? And then I am going to do ahead of time what I can do to make it happen. Of course, from my standpoint, that involves estate planning documents. So if I have a living trust, I'm going to look at that trust and I'm going to say, what do I want to put in that trust to cover this? For instance, if I'm going to be in a nursing home and someone's going to make a decision about me going home or not, I want somebody to make that decision who has my best interests in mind and is not going to be worried about maximizing the number of dollars they're going to get when I'm gone. And I don't want to be cynical, but every child who's entitled to part of the residue of the estate, they're in a conflict of interest situation because every $10,000 that gets spent on dad's unnecessary care is $10,000 doesn't go in their pocket. So who do I have making this decision? I might say yes, for most of the duties that need to be fulfilled to handle my financial affairs, I want my oldest son to be my trustee. But on these issues, I want my CPA to be a co-trustee with my son. Or I want a trust company involved in this. Somebody to make sure that we're maximizing the chance for dad's planning to be actually carried out as dad had in mind. So who are my trustees? And when we name somebody as a trustee, we don't have to have one trustee who does everything. We can have trustees who do this and trustees who do this. We break out the duties. That's not in most of your planning right now. It can be put in. Then in your planning, if you've done planning with us, we have a really nice section on what's called special needs situations. And your trust says, and it's somewhere around Article 12, if you have one of our trusts, it says, if I am leaving money to someone and they're in a special needs situation, or they've had a car accident, or they've got some kind of medical problem, and they're receiving needs-based benefits, I'm not just going to give them their money, because every dollar I give them, they'll lose $1 in benefits. So we've just wasted my inheritance. I'm going to leave them their share in such a way they can get a benefit, and the government benefits will be unaffected. So I want their inheritance to be only for their special needs, not the needs that would disqualify them. That's already in the trust. That's for them. But what about having similar provisions for me, for the trust maker? Says, if I end up in a situation where I'm in a nursing home, I want my trustee to hire a geriatric care manager, a geriatric nurse. I want a professional to come in and see what my situation is and give me the level of care that is possible given my circumstances. And I want my trustee to pay that person out of my funds, and I want my trustee to listen to that person. So my trustee is maybe my son. Maybe it's my son and my CPA. They hire the geriatric care manager, and the geriatric care manager, that's the person who's going out to benefits and seeing how this is working out and what we could do. That's the person who says, okay, Dad can come home, here's what he wants to do, here's his medical situation, we get him home, here's what we can do to take care of Dad in the best way. So we're bringing in people to our planning other than just our physician. Our physicians are great, but they're not there every day. So the special needs trust section of your living trust right now has some provisions we might want to have apply to us.
How do you balance that, really, Keith, with the typical plan where you give fairly broad health care powers of attorney, typically to a family member, it can be that same son or daughter, and they're saying, wait, I have the legal authority to make these decisions, trustees stay out of it.
Well, so the question is, how does the decision making on these issues sort out between the powers I've given in my healthcare power of attorney versus the powers I've given in my trust? The healthcare power of attorney, I'm designating Becky to make my healthcare decisions. If I'm up in the hospital and I'm out of it, I've just been in a car accident and they're wanting to do some procedure with a 10% chance of recovery or something like that. And of course, Art's in this business, so this is not a trick question, but it's a difficult question. The healthcare power of attorney is supposedly just dealing with healthcare issues, but there's money involved in that. And usually we've named the same people in the healthcare power of attorney as we've named in the trust, but not necessarily. Probably Davidson Trust Company is not going to be named in any healthcare powers of attorney, but it's named in a lot of trusts. So we've got the healthcare agent going one direction and the trustee going another. And I guess all I can say, Art, is that there's a crossover of duties, and if the trustee is not following the healthcare wishes of the agent and the trust gives the authority to bump the trustee, that might be a basis to bump the trustee. So you're going to get some common strategy based on the fact that, at least in our trusts, we pick the best trustees that we can pick, but we make it easy to change things if we're not all on the same page. Not a very good answer maybe, but we got to deal with what we've got. And yes, healthcare has to make sense economically. Here, the idea is Dad up front is saying, it makes economic sense to me to spend up to $250,000 on my end-of-life care. And I've documented that in my trust, who I want to be involved. And then the next step is I've set aside $250,000 into a specific account. It's still owned by my trust, but that's the account. And I've talked a little bit to some financial people. They've got a lot of ideas on how this account's set up. But whatever it is, whether it's stocks or mutual funds or some kind of a life insurance product, whatever, that's designated. I've designated, I've got people who are in charge of managing that money who I think will follow my plans. And maybe in my planning, I've got a separate sub-trust to deal with that. You know, I've got a living trust, and it says when I die, I set up a trust for my wife or my kids. Well, when I'm still alive, a sub-trust is going to have authority over this account. Maybe my son's the trustee of everything else, but on this account, it's my CPA and Davidson Trust and my daughter, or whatever. So I've set aside the money, and I'm just pulling this $200,000 out of the air, but whatever seems reasonable. And probably my planning says whatever I don't use goes to my kids, so on.
Let me only give you for the group's benefit, not promoting any services at all. But if you look at your numbers and you're not talking about hospice, I think you need to think, because of our own experience with it, 2 to 5 years as a forecast of living at home, relying solely on your own resources, at whatever level you've decided you want that to be. Because we see, you know, look, medical care is a lot better than it used to be. People get extra help, they get the extra services, but they also get all of the modern medicine that allows them to sustain a lot longer than you really expect. And the downside of it, unfortunately, that I won't get into gory details with stories because there are many, it's not always the children, it's the sons-in-laws and daughters-in-laws who have tremendous impact on these decisions. So as you go into that planning situation, you want to be thinking, it's not just my son or daughter, but the rest of the extended family that has influence on this. And the better you can communicate, the better you can act independently, the better off you are.
Okay, that's my next point. So I'm capturing this for posterity here. Art is suggesting that the people whom we name as trustees, yes, they have the legal authority, but if they're married, that spouse is going to be exerting a lot of authority in an informal way, and it may not be what the son would have done absent that pressure from his wife. And another point I heard you make, Art, is that with the good medical care we have right now, we might be looking at somebody being home 2 to 5 years, who in past years wouldn't last at all.
So how do you counteract that? Because that's kind of an interesting point, or should you counteract that? I would assume what you're implying is that maybe the son-in-law or daughter-in-law had maybe more a financial interest
Or just a long experience in the family dynamics that's counter to what the individual child might. I'm trying to be gentle there.
Right.
But sometimes it's brutal. But you need to take that into account. And yes, I'm one small promotion of professional trustees. They're one step removed, and they aren't influenced as much by that. And you need to set the rules very clearly so they know when to push back and when not to.
Aren't you saying more or less that the extended family, after you say your children are gone, and say before you do, then your extended family enters the picture more? Until that time, though, you have to be concerned about your extended family.
They still have influence on the exercise of authority during your lifetime because they influence that child behind the scenes. Sometimes you are not aware of that. So it's a factor, is all. And I think the more you can create some independent circumstances that trigger or take place earlier than you think you even need them, the better off you are.
Yeah. So I want to capture some of this very good discussion for the camera. When we're doing the living trust-based planning that most of you have done, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of decisions. It takes a lot of time. We've got our hands full getting that basic planning in place. So while I think we do some great planning, there's a lot of issues that we don't spend as much time on as we could. And one huge issue is who our trustees are and our backups and so on. People default to close family members, usually kids. And I think it's part of my job to point out some of the limitations on that, but if after that discussion they want to go ahead and name Johnny as the trustee, that's what we do. Well, now we're talking about saying, okay, maybe Johnny's the trustee for everything, but let's spend some time now that we have our trust in place, fine-tuning. And with regard to end-of-life care, let's remember that Johnny's married to Sue, and Sue's not a trustee, but Sue's going to be involved in this decision-making on an informal basis. And if we ignore that, we're not doing the best planning we could. So to give Johnny a chance to really do what he'd like to do,
Yeah.
maybe we have a trustee that's a corporate trustee or a CPA or somebody else to maximize the chance we get the decision that would be best for Dad. Art then made the point that I want to jump to. This planning is great. So it's my planning. I designate I want $200,000 to be used for this. I want the level of care to be what a loving daughter would provide to me. Put that right in the trust. Not a loving son, a loving daughter. I want to get good care. And I name the best trustees possible and so on. Great. Now I need to communicate that. I need to get Johnny, maybe Sue, but Johnny, write down and explain to him what I want. And I do want the other kids there too, a family meeting. So again, if you've done planning with us, you know we provide part of our comprehensive process. We host a family meeting where we talk about the planning. Well, so it's really important that when I say, you know, this $200,000 is for my end-of-life care, here's how I see this working. Johnny, you're the trustee, I'd like you to do this. Johnny shakes his head yes. Everybody else sees him shake his head yes. I have found that that conversation is huge. In our office, it's in the last 6 months, 2 different times, we're dealing with the state administration. A question comes up, and one of the kids said, "Oh, I remember Dad talked about that." 10 years ago, in a conversation, Dad mentioned that. And this child restates what Dad said, that settles it. Where, in the absence of that discussion of Dad, they might have gone different directions. What Dad said, not in any legal paper, but what Dad said to that person, if the other kids believe it, that's what happens. So planning, we do the best documentation possible, but then we really communicate that to the people who need to be involved. Our trustees, our family members, people who will maximize the chance that our planning happens. Okay, so where are we? So I think today we talked about 2 things. One of them is you're sitting right now, probably in a house, maybe it's a condo, and you're thinking, how do I see my later years? Am I going to stay here? Do I want to build a new house? If so, what do I need to encompass in the design of that new house? If I'm going to stay, are there some things that I should do now while I can, might increase my enjoyment, but will make it easy for me to stay here? So for instance, this house Becky and I were looking at, it had, how wide is the doorway into the bathroom?
It was 24.
24. Becky said, we're widening that door. Okay. One of the killers that didn't go ahead with this deal was we thought we probably would want to expand the master bedroom. Maybe not right now, but later on. Well, it's in the floodplain. With the new revised floodplain that we have, we learned last year that the federal government raised the 100-year floodplain by 3 feet in Great Falls. So houses that you didn't used to have issues now have issues. So when we were going to expand that master bedroom, we were going to have steps up another 2 feet. Well, that's not what we have in mind for aging. We want all one level. So we look at our current house. Maybe we hire an interior designer. Maybe we hire occupational therapist. For instance, Spectrum has them. Maybe we hire a contractor who has experience. Becky and I have learned about a program that we're proposing to get ourselves certified in. It's called Certified Aging in Place Specialist. It's 3 days of training. It's really more Becky's construction area than is mine, but I want to know about it. There are people in Great Falls already certified in that. So maybe I'd get an inspection done and see how that affects any planning I'd want to do. On the dying at home side of this, we'd spend some time thinking, maybe some reading, communicating back and forth, maybe talking to our advisors, CPAs or trustees or attorneys, maybe putting some planning in place right now. Whatever we do formally, we do informally. We communicate it to one another and to our family member. There's no right or wrong answer, but it's issues that are going to probably come up for most of us. And to the extent we've clarified our own thinking ahead of time, when we're clear-headed and we're not under the stress of the situation, we're not in the nursing home with 14 tubes and weird chemicals sourcing through our veins, we maximize the chance that our planning is going to benefit us and our family. That's what I wanted to talk about. Questions?
I just have a comment to make. All of these have been very good discussions about planning and administration and all that. But the key person who's actually the caregiver, in my family, not too long ago, my mother's cousin in Michigan, who was quite wealthy, husband was gone, her daughter didn't live near her, but made all the arrangements to hire a caregiver. And the caregiver went in over a period of a year and systematically stole jewelry, anything she could fit in her very large purse. And the daughter, not living close, didn't realize, you know, she came in every 6 months to check on her mom, and she didn't notice these little things missing. So in part of this whole discussion about money and administration and all of that is excellent, but also who are you actually going to hire? Is this person reputable? Is this person bonded? Is this person with a firm that accepts responsibility if things start to go missing?
Yep.
I mean, that's important too.
So just to capture that for the film, a story about a lady in Michigan
Yes.
who got a caregiver in who stole from the estate. The daughter thought she'd picked somebody very reputable, but the daughter wasn't there except on an intermittent basis. Big problems. So if we have an agency involved for the home care instead of an individual, maybe that's a little bit better. Might be more expensive, but we got maybe a better chance, and we've got a little bit deeper pocket maybe if there's been some theft. Will we be able to prove it? That's another issue. If we have a geriatric care manager who comes into the house every, whatever it is, 2 weeks, and reports back to the daughter who's out of state, maybe we can get a better handle on that. The geriatric care manager is going to be looking more at quality of life and not so much as counting the jewelry, so that still may not help that much. But one of the hardest parts of estate planning is picking the people who are going to help us, starting with the trustees, but getting right down to the in-home health care. And it's just a tough area, Sharon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really
I
is.
just thought I'd mention that.
Thank you.
because
Yeah.
That is an issue for Candy.
Yep.
Excuse me.
Dan?
A comment on that. With technology, the way it is now, you can put an in-home surveillance system in. I mean, if you're handy with wires, you can do it for $300 to $500, as cheap as $300 to $500, and you just hook it up to your computer. And if I'm, Cheryl and I have left for a couple of months in January and told my son, stay the hell, you're not coming out there and partying in the hot tub type of thing. He's 32, but, we could just dial in with the phone and see what's going on there. But long-term wise, for each of our guys, peace of mind, we all, we've seen cases where people get, you have bad caregivers, and you put that in place ahead of time so that even if you don't have your capacities, at least it's available to your kids or something, that type of thing is there and it's going. It's really cheap.
And the healthcare or the person in the house knows that camera's up there. Yeah, well, so we didn't even get into, so I'm going to try to capture this. So we're talking about what in the literature they call assistive technologies. What kind of technology can we put in the house that would help mom and dad? And what Dan is suggesting is that one type of cheap, easy to install type of technology are cameras. Now, mom and dad might not like having that camera there. That's an issue. But if mom and dad are good with that, particularly when mom and dad get less competent, could be a real way to maximize the chance that people don't do bad stuff. Other forms of assistive technology are, of course, the, what do you call that your mom has around her neck? Lifeline. You know, so that we've got a way to get hold of medical help when we fall down and can't get up. And you know, it seems like every day there's some new app for your iPhone where it's capturing your blood pressure and how many steps you're taking. And there's, actually I read an article where your assistive technology is really keeping track of how much you're moving. So, and that tells a lot. So we didn't even get into that, but it's, and whatever we have today is going to be 20 times better tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it's an area to really be thinking about also. Gives us a better chance to stay home and get the kind of health care and emergency services that we think we want. Other comments or questions?
Can I dive in one last time? I'm sorry, go ahead, Deb.
Sometimes that caregiver who's pilfering can be a family member.
Yes.
Sure.
And it can be very, I just have some friends from Michigan. And the mother lived in Arizona half of the year. And the daughter wormed her way in some weird way, claimed that her mother was not mentally capable of making decisions, and just raised havoc with the estate. It's just been a nightmare. 2 years of really unbelievable fighting.
Yeah. So again, to capture this, we're just talking about the fact that this caregiver who's pilfering might be a family member.
Definitely.
I just did some planning with some people, and it's a second marriage, and we're updating their planning. So we're coming to this issue again. First did their planning in 2006. The stepmom is really concerned that that stepson, even though he's not a trustee, has no authority, something happens to dad, he's going to be right there asserting his authority and pushing her around and taking advantage of her. And that's a really real concern. The legal documents don't give him any authority whatsoever, but family dynamics and personalities, and I'm sorry to say this guy is a lawyer, so you got the ego going here. She's really concerned about it, and we need to factor that in because family members are our greatest resource, but they don't always do what we'd like to have them do. Yeah. Art, you said you had one last comment?
And I don't know, this might be a whole nother session, but everything you just said is certainly true, and I could endlessly tell stories about all the events with now second and third marriages and children from multiple marriages and all that's a whole another topic. But how about dementia? As opposed to physical impairment, you know, where do you try to draw the line on somebody identifying that and having to take proactive kind of steps? Because we have clients, they're in assisted living or they're at home, wander out the door and disappear and don't even know they've done it. And the caregiver, who might be a hired person, may or may not even be there at the time because they don't want to pay for it all day long. And then you get into this dilemma of, well, when does somebody intervene and say, well, wait, we've got a medical professional, we've got family members, how do they deal with that versus the state of desire to say, I just want to live in my house till I die?
Yeah. So you're raising a topic of dementia and the fact that a lot of people are in a kind of a gray area where they're wandering off and they don't know where they are and so on, but they've never been deemed to be incapacitated. Right. And as you know, the planning that we do, we say, let's have the people whom we choose ahead of time be the ones who make the decision whether I'm incapacitated now. And if they're not available, let's have this backup. And usually we're relying upon family members and our attending physician. And usually that's a good decision. Of course, again, kids are in a conflict of interest situation, but the problem is dementia is so varied. There's no black and white to it. And in the morning, I'm great. In the afternoon, I'm not so good. So for instance, in our estate planning, when we're trying to decide whether the person has legal capacity to sign a trust or a will, it's very time specific. And I don't care if in the afternoon they don't recognize their son. If in the morning when I meet with them, they are, in my opinion, competent, I'm okay with having them sign that trust. But they're up and down. And Art, as I say, you've got a lot of really good questions because you've seen these problems just like I have. But I guess one idea with regard to your planning, if done planning with us, we've already spent some time talking about that. But now we have more time to do some more thinking about it. And it might not just make sense to have the available child in Great Falls make that call with the physician. Maybe we need to be looking at that incapacity determination a little bit differently. And maybe we're willing to make it a little bit more formal because we're concerned that we're going to have people making incorrect decisions, declaring somebody incapacitated who's not. Or we've got a son who he's not paying attention. Dad's really gone downhill over the last 3 months, and the son's been so busy. Well, he's an elk hunter, so he's been gone all fall or whatever. So it's really worth going back again and looking at the people we've named and making sure we got the right people on the right seat in the bus.
I'll only add one last statistic, and then I'll promise I won't do more today. I won't do more damage to your seminar. I believe I saw it the other day that the prediction for the next decade or so of the aging baby boomers and beyond is that somewhere in the range of 40% of that population over the next couple of decades will clearly have difficult times with Alzheimer's or worse. So they'll be alive, but they'll be completely incapacitated in some form mentally. So look around the room. You know, if there's 15 people here, that means 6 or 7 of us statistically are likely to be in that group.
Well, and I'm sorry to say, my mom died from dementia, so did 2 of her sisters. I don't like my odds. Well, so thank you very much for coming. I hope you got some... Oh, Tanya's reminding me, please fill out our questionnaire. We really look at these things, and one of the areas that we're particularly interested in is, of course, how we can do better, but what ideas you have for upcoming workshops. We'd love to get your input on that. I hope this has been useful to you, at least stimulated some thought. Of course, we're happy to chat more with you about any of these things.